Okay, we're going to work on the Pearberry basket today, and we've got the background based and the line drawing transferred to our surface. The first thing we're going to do is start working on the basket, and we're going to do all the shading first. And I've got burnt umber on my palette and some faux finishing glaze, or faux finishing medium it's called. It's a Traditions medium, and this medium has a little bit of extender in it, so it dries a little more slowly, so we can work on our floats and shading on the basket. So the first thing we want to do is shade. We're going to work on this bottom part, and I'm going to shade down each of these little vertical bands on the basket. So the first thing we're going to do is brush some of this faux finish medium down, just following the perpendicular line. You just want a very light coat of it. And then we're going to, with that loaded in our brush, we're going to pick up a little bit of the burnt umber on the tip and side load the brush with burnt umber. So we're brushing both sides on your palette so you get that paint spread nice and evenly through the brush. And then we're going to come back along here and just float down this line to divide the two weaves on the basket. You can see I'm doing this in little short strokes and just softening as I go along. Come back and brush over. If it gets too dry, add a little bit more of the medium to your brush. Okay, so we've got one down. I'm going to switch to a different brush just to put the medium down so I don't have to keep cleaning the brush out. So we're going to pick up a little bit of the faux finish medium. And my brush was damp to start with. And we're going to brush down the line. You just want a soft sheen of that medium on your surface. I'll pick up a little bit more on the brush we're side loading with. Reload with paint. I haven't cleaned the brush out in between. I'm just using the same side load but just freshening up the paint a little bit. That one, because I was a little faster at doing that. That went on a little smoother than the first one. We're going to just continue this across the basket. Add a little bit of the medium, pick up a little more paint, and I'm working back in that same side load track. Push down and then go back and smooth over that line. I'm going to pick up and put a little bit of this medium out on my palette so I don't get the clean medium dirty by dipping my paintbrush in it. I'm going to pick up a little more paint, brush out our side load and come back and brush down that line over top of the medium that we put down. Short strokes and come back and smooth out the whole length. Now when we get over here where the bird is, we're just going to ignore the bird, act like he's not even there. We're going to just go right over top of him so that you don't have to try to work around. If we need to trace him back in later, we can do that. A little more medium, a little more paint. You can see I'm brushing that out really well to make sure that's blended. Short overlapping strokes to come down the length of the basket weave. We're just following that tracing line. And after we get to the bottom, go back and smooth over. And that faux finishing medium keeps the paint moist, and you can see how smoothly those floats go on. Now we'll go back after this dries and do another layer on some of these. You can see where I'm not perfectly even. This one here is a little bit lighter. This one's a little bit darker, so I'll go back and go over some of these after they've dried to even them up a little more. Do this last one here. Again, we're working right over top of the bird. One thing nice working with one of these type of mediums, sometimes I'll use a glazing medium also with a little extender in it, is that they're more the consistency of the paint than if you just use water in your brush. So a lot of times if you try to float with water, if you have too much water, the paint just runs right across your brush and you get a dirty edge on the side that's supposed to be clean. And if you don't have enough water, sometimes it won't spread across at all. But because the faux finishing medium or glazing mediums are more the consistency and weight of the paint, it helps hold that paint in place and blends it together. So I find it gives you a really pretty float versus just sometimes, you know, if you're not real experienced, just using water. Now, I'm hoping this one's dry here. We're going to go back and switch over a little more medium on this one. That one got a little bit light to start with. Pick up a little more medium, a touch more paint. I'm going to work that out pretty thin since I don't want to get it too dark. And we're going to come back over here, running down the same line. You can see that one gives it a little bit more even appearance with these others. I think this one also needs a little bit more, so I'm going to again put a light coat of the faux finishing medium down that line, And it goes side to side on that weave, so you have some nice moist medium to blend your float into. Keeps you from getting a hard edge. So again, we're going to try to not use quite so much paint as we initially did, so we don't build up too much. Come back, work down that line, and smooth it out. Okay, the next place, we're going to do this before we stop and start doing the opposite sides, is to work on the rim of the basket a little bit. On the rim, you're going to have some shading here where it overlaps itself. So I'm going to shade around the front edge of that curved area where the band overlaps itself. And later we'll decorate that with some little rivets, like it's being held together. We're going to do some shading on this outside edge over here. And I'm spreading this medium a little bit wider, probably about 1.5 inches over on that one. Pick up a little bit more of the faux finish medium on your brush. I'll pick up a little bit more paint this time, because we want to walk this float out. And when I say walk it out, we're going to come here along the edge, but because this area is so wide, we don't want it to just be that little narrow shade on that outer edge. So I'm going to bring my brush over and start about maybe 1/4 inch in, and keep softening that in a little bit further, just jumping over about 1/8 to 1/4 inch each time. And as you come over, the paint's going to get a little bit lighter and lighter because you've got less paint on your brush. I'm just barely touching some of that to soften it out. You could also use a mop brush or some type of dry brush to soften some of that area too. And I'm just tapping the brush up and down in that. So you can see we've worked that shading over here in probably about 1.5 inches on that side. Now we want to do some shading on the handle. Again, just a little more of the medium. I'm trying to keep that more towards the clean end of the brush. Pick a little bit of paint up. Soften them together on the palette. And I'm going to, because this handle's so narrow, I'm just kind of putting my brush in at an angle so that I'm angling it up so the clean edge is along the outside line of the basket handle. And then I'm just going to drag that up along the edge. So we have the dark edge towards the inside of the basket handle. And you can see I'm almost working up on the chisel edge of my brush. There's even more so as you get up to this real narrow section, and we're just sort of softly filling that handle in with the darker color. And there's a little bit of the handle down here under the basket tag. Shade that a little bit. Then we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side of the handle. Pick up a little paint, a little of the medium on your brush, and we're going to come here and get my head out of the camera angle, work in Came in a little too far. Can come back later and clean that up with some of the background color. I'm going to work the opposite direction. We want to come down, excuse me, along that pear, the outer edge of the pear. Just go a little shading behind it. Go back and brush this side out a little bit more too. Okay. So you can see right in this area I need to go back and clean that inside edge of the basket handle up. It got a little onto the background. So I'll just paint over that with some of the sand background color. So now our basket seems to be dry. So let's go back and start working on the opposite side of these vertical, don't know if you call them staves or weaves or what of the basket, but I'm again repeating the same thing we did before. Put down some medium, which is just clean medium. You should just see just a slight sheen from that. It should go on, feel like it's going on kind of like satiny feeling. And to load our brush with some medium and some paint, and this time we're going to have the paint edge of the brush towards the right side of the basket as you're facing. I'm turning it sideways because it's easier for me to work along this line this direction. Short overlapping strokes, feels a little dry. So I'm adding a little more medium. And how fast it dries will kind of depend on your circumstances, what your room temperature is and humidity. So you may have to adjust a little bit to add more or less medium. And I'm bringing that all around the curved edge of the bottom. I'll let that dry because where I stopped and added some more medium, it's starting to tack up and the paint gets a little splotchy if it gets too dry, and then you go over with some wet. I'm going to put a little more medium on this one because that one seemed to dry out so fast. But it's still not enough that you're getting ridges or anything. It's just a smooth coat. And again, you've noticed that I haven't had to clean the brush at all in between these. We've been painting on the basket from the very beginning, and I haven't once cleaned the brush out. Now, when you start working back this direction where you have the two darks meet, it's nice to have this little dark line where the two shades meet, because that gives you a real nice sharp little shadow that separates the two. Okay, so you can see we've got initial shading done on all of them. We're going to let that dry, and then we'll come back and add some little darker shading in some of the areas. So I'm going to stop the video for right now and let this dry, and then I'll come back after a break. Let the first shading that we've done dry, and I've gone back and cleaned up around the handle where I got a little rough around the edges with some of the sand background color. That's just Americana sand. So now we're going to do some more shading on the basket, and we're going to switch to a different color. We're going to use some raw umber. The first color that we used was raw burnt umber, and this time we're going to switch to raw umber, which is a little bit darker. So I'm going to put a little bit of this out on my palette. Don't need very much. And I'm going to switch and use a smaller brush so that our floats are a little bit narrower. And I'm going to use a 1/4 inch angle, where the first time we were using like a 3/8 inch angle. So I'm going to use the 3/8 inch to put down some of our faux finish medium. And we're going to go along the same route that we did the first time, but we're going to add some floats of raw umber instead of burnt umber. Burnt umber is a more redder color, and raw umber is more of a cooler brown. So again, faux finish medium down, the brush loaded with some faux finish medium and raw umber, and we're going to come down and add another float. And this shouldn't be a major difference in color, it's just going to give you a little bit darker shade. And again, since we're using a smaller brush, the float's going to be just a little bit narrower, so it's not going to totally cover up that burnt umber shading that we did. And this should probably go a little faster since we've already got one layer of shading down. And you put layers of shading over top of each other. Each one tends to make the surface look a little smoother. Short overlapping strokes, and then just run from top to bottom to soften that. So we're going to move along fairly quickly doing this. And you can see that's not making a major difference, but it's just getting a little bit darker darks. The whole point of this method of painting, it's called grisaille, where you work in all your shadows, like a monotone underpainting that's all just darks and lights. And you can do it in shades of black and gray, from black to white and all the shades in between, or you can do it in umbers, which a lot of times I work in umbers just because it gives a little warmer tone to your finished painting, especially when you're painting something like a basket that has wood tones to begin with. We're going to switch over and do the rim of the basket. And on this again, you don't want to come all the way across the shading, which we did on the initial layer. You want to keep this darker value closer to the side of the basket. So I'm not going to walk that color out as far. We'll just do maybe a ½ inch here instead of the 1.5 inches. And again, add a little bit here where the rim overlaps. And on the handle, let's just add a little bit here, just at the bottom, around this little hang tag, and on this side by the pear. And I'm not even bothering to put the faux finish medium. There's enough in the brush to spread around this little area. Just want to darken there behind where the pear is going to be. Okay, let's go back and work on the opposite sides of the vertical staves, and I'm trying to stay out of the left side. I'm just trying to put some of the faux finish medium down on the right, because I'm not sure if we're totally dry on the other side. But with the smaller brush, you shouldn't have too much trouble overlapping and getting into what you already put down. Some other things I want to do while we're working in this color is to add a little bit of grain into the wood. You know, the basket's made out of thin slices of wood, and because I like it to look like an old rustic basket, I'd like some wood grain in it. So I'm going to pick up just a small liner brush, or you can use a small round, and pick up a little bit of that raw umber and actually pull some little lines of like wood grain. You can see I start out thin, push down thick, and then drag thin again, and just vary those a little bit. And some can just be straight. You want to add a little bit of water to that so that it comes off your brush easy. But it's, you know, it's wood grain, it's little splits in the wood, just showing this is an old basket. And we're just going to come along and vary those. You don't want them all to look exactly the same. And you can also go, as you're doing this, go in between the vertical basket slats. And actually, if you don't have a lot of shading in between, just draw a dark line down between them so you can see where each one starts and stops. It's like a little shadow in between where the two would meet.